The Olympics, Drag Queen Story Hour finally goes prime time. And so that first of all, I owe big tech an apology because my previous broadcast was muted, and I thought, well, maybe big tech is censoring my content. Come to find out, it wasn't big tech that was the problem, it was little tech. So hopefully we got this worked out and we'll be able to kind of walk through what I wanted to share with you about all of this. So you've seen the big hullabaloo that has been following the Olympics opening ceremony, and all of the social media debates about if this was truly a depiction of the Last Supper or if this was something else entirely. And Christians, once again, are just all up in arms over nothing. And I want to talk a little bit about that and see if we can kind of at least come to some sort of understanding on what this was really all about. But first I want to talk about Drag Queen Story Hour. Drag Queen Story Hour is a global phenomenon. It's a global program where drag queens read stories to children in various community spaces, including libraries, schools, bookstores, museums, summer camps, and after-school programs. The events are usually geared towards children ages 3 through 11. And I know one thing for sure when I was a kid at that age is that sex and gender was really the last thing that was on my mind. All I wanted to do was to play and have fun and just be kind of left to my own devices. But nevertheless, that it's this Drag Queen Story Hour is aimed at promoting reading and diversity. Drag Queen Story Hour events also celebrate diversity, teach empathy, and help to curb bullying of LGBTQ kids. First of all, I am in full agreement with the idea that no child should be bullied for any reason. But that doesn't mean, therefore, that Drag Queen Story Hour is a good thing to promote to kids. So let's get back to this, and I just want to notice a couple more things here before we move on. That Drag Queen Story Hour also has other goals, including capturing the imagination and play of gender fluidity in childhood, giving kids glamorous, positive, and unabashedly queer role models. And I don't know for sure, the whole idea. I remember years ago when talk was kind of brewing about all of these topics, and that said, well, we're not coming after your children, but and so here we are today, and that with programs that are decidedly geared towards children, and that helping kids understand identity and intersectionality. Intersectionality is one of the code words of critical theory, which is really the preeminent viewpoint philosophy in our culture today, secular culture, allowing kids to see people who defy rigid gender restrictions. Now, I don't know exactly what a rigid gender restriction is, because it seems to me, other than, a parent's first concern is a child healthy, is it a boy or a girl? Now, I understand the difference, at least the constructed difference that we have about the difference between sex and gender. And it's my understanding that we're up to over 50 plus genders now, according to some folks, and that the rigid gender categories of boy and girl, male and female, no longer apply. Well, that I'm not naive. I understand the whole reality of intersexed persons where they have ambiguous genitalia, but that's not what this is about. What this is about essentially saying that you can kind of define your identity with respect to your sexuality and sexual preferences and your body itself based on your whims and how you're, or at least based on how you're feeling. How about we say it that way? So that also it's about reading and teaching deeper lessons on diversity, love, and appreciation for others. And that comes straight from Google. Here's the thing that I find a little bit disturbing is that when I was a kid, I really loved watching the Olympics. And that I was never really that big on the opening ceremonies anyway. I loved the Summer Olympics. I wasn't that big of a fan of the Winter Olympics, but I grew to love those also. But I can imagine what it would be like to be a parent today and sit down for what you think is a worldwide sporting event where we will be able to watch the elite of the elite athletes from all around the world compete in their chosen sport. But first of all, you have to be subject to this opening ceremony. And I can only imagine what it'd be like to be a parent. You know, I'm past that time, but being a parent with young kids and having to sit down and having this indoctrination and being promulgated once again to on the world stage. So here's some questions that we should ask. First of all, and I've heard this over and over and over, that, well, you Christians, you're just up in arms about this, you know. And so we have to ask ourselves, you know, did we misinterpret the whole thing? And I think that we can settle that pretty easily by listening to what one of the performers has to say about this event. Now, this is a broadcast from a French television news program, and so I interpreted the conversation based on an AI program that gave me this interpretation. And then although it's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, I think that you can follow along with what this performer is saying and to get the gist of the intent of this opening ceremony. So let's go ahead and we'll watch that at this.
Qu'une scène a fait particulièrement réagir, un tableau en tout cas, c'est celle de la scène qui a été revisitée, ce fameux repas avec les apôtres. Est-ce que vous pouvez comprendre que certains aient pu être choqués par cette référence biblique ou pas?
Justement, c'est ça que je vous expliquais tout à l'heure, c'est qu'en fait, cette référence biblique, elle a été utilisée dans la pop culture depuis des années, des décennies. C'est absolument pas nouveau. Il y en a tout le temps. Cette représentation-là, elle est utilisée tout le temps. Et encore une fois, à partir du moment où il n'y a pas de provocation réelle, dans le sens où il n'y a pas de choses qui soient considérées comme véritablement obscènes, etc., on ne s'est pas moqué du tout de ce tableau-là, en fait. C'est juste les personnes qui, eux, le voient d'une certaine manière, se disent que c'est de la moquerie parce que du coup, on est dans des habits, des costumes, etc., qui diffèrent de ce que eux acceptent.
So you can see just from the remarks that kind of went by there on the screen that, yes, this was a depiction of a biblical scene, Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper. And so that was the intent. Now, I take what this performer says at face value, that this was not intended to be a mockery, but I want us to kind of at least think a little bit more deeply about what's going on here. And one of the things that concerns me about all of this is the gaslighting that's going on in our culture today. And we see this from so many places. I see this in the media. I see this on social media and various platforms where people say, no, what you saw is not what you thought it was. It's what we say it is. And I'm hearing this more and more from politicians. But gaslighting is a form of abuse that involves manipulating someone into questioning their own reality. And gaslighters insist that they're right, refusing to consider facts or the victim's perspective. So in other words, is that no matter what evidence you provide to the gaslighters, is that they are always going to come back and say, no, you got it wrong. And it's just impossible for them to kind of get to that place where they recognize that maybe they're the ones that got the interpretation wrong. So I think it's pretty evident that this is a depiction. I don't think that it was a mockery myself when I step back from this and think a little bit about it. I don't think that they were trying to mock Christianity, although certainly that was the outcome of this. And but I think there's something actually much more nefarious going on here than that. One individual accused me of over sacralizing the Da Vinci painting, and I have no dog in this fight with respect to whether or not I venerate the Da Vinci painting. That's not my concern at all. I do appreciate the art, and I have always been interested in art from a very young age. That's really what the trajectory of what I wanted my life to be is about art and understanding art. One of the things I do know about art is that art is just about a whole lot more than colors on a canvas or some sort of material that's turned into a sculpture. Is that the Last Supper that we have here by Da Vinci is an interpretation of a holy moment of sacrifice, redemption, and God's love. And I find that it's really irrelevant with respect to Da Vinci's personal religious commitments or personal sexual practices. Is that I think it's pretty evident is what he was doing is that he was capturing a holy moment of sacrifice, redemption, and God's love. And so here's what great art does is that it communicates deeper truths and a particular understanding of reality. And I think that that's what the Last Supper does. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's been such a beloved painting down through the centuries. But here's where I've landed on this with respect to whether or not France and the IOC knew what they were doing. And I am absolutely convinced, it's my personal belief, but I'm absolutely convinced that they knew full well that what they were doing when they created this tableau of the Last Supper. This did not catch them by surprise. Rather, just like with Da Vinci's painting, is that painting back in those days with the medium that they had, is that that was a statement and a viewpoint about reality. And so it is with this tableau that the French and the performers there displayed at the opening of the Olympics. So what is it that they were trying to depict? Well, here's one thing that I've concluded, and I think one of the best statements that I heard with respect to this is that I've paraphrased it somewhat, but the secular West brooks no rivals. Now, when you stop and think about that worldviews or large meta-narratives that have captured culture and society, that there's really only like 3 predominant ones right now in the world, and one of those is the secular West with its woke ideology and its commitment to critical theory and the idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion according to them. And one of their favorite tropes that they like to constantly refer to is racism and white privilege and white supremacy and so on and so forth. The second main worldview that is vying for dominance in our culture today is Islam. And it's the stated goal in Islam to not just promote that religion, but to overtake all world systems and to subjugate anyone who sees things otherwise, and to help them, whoever sees things otherwise, to be forced into a recognition of the domination of Islam. And then finally we have a Judeo-Christian worldview that we're talking about here. And I think that this is a clear attempt by France and the IOC to sanction the secular narrative that France has embraced, and that the idea is that this must not only be embraced by others, but also promoted by our citizens. And one of the things that I see about the secular West and this woke ideology is that it really is fundamentally tyrannical. It is it's the tyranny of beliefs and moralities. Morality, in other words, is that you have to believe what the accepted party line is about things like sex, gender, things like race and intersectionality, and on down the line. There's a whole kind of, diversity, equity. Equity is a big one, and inclusion is that you have to regurgitate the party line. Otherwise, you're an outcast, an outsider, and you really need to be marginalized. But also, you have to embrace our understanding of morality. And our understanding of morality is going to clash. And I'm telling you right now, it's very evident that that's going to clash not only with Judeo-Christian values, but also Islamic values. And it's too early to say what's going to happen, but it seems to me that that the West, and particularly Europe, is moving more and more to Islamic domination. And when that happens, is that these values that the secular West has adopted are going to be completely squeezed out. But that's another topic for another day. So there again, on my Facebook feed and listening to other Christians talking and Christian leaders, is that there's kind of this theme that, really as Christians, what we need to do is we need to be loving. But I have a lot of problems with that. It's not so much that I have problems with being loving. I just have questions about what love really looks like. Is it truly unloving to object or to denounce something like we saw at the opening ceremonies? And should we just, quote unquote, show people the love of Christ? And when we're talking about that, I just always bump up against the hard edges of reality and ask, well, how do we do that then? How do we truly show people the love of Christ? Does that mean that we have to endorse what we saw at the Olympics, or to be silent, or to pretend that this is not some sort of statement about how things should be and what we should believe. I had one lady respond to my points, and she said that, well, I'm just not the person to spread hate and negativity around a community of people. And I'm telling you right now, neither am I. Is that I am not going to be the type of person. I'll call out Christians when they exhibit hate, and it's not negativity to think otherwise than what people say is the correct way to think. I kind of always filter it through this funnel, is that I have to fundamentally be loving to everyone. Jesus calls us to do that. Secondly, is that I have to accept everyone. What do I mean by that? Is that I'm not going to deny where a person is at in their life. I'm going to accept them and what they believe and what they practice. That doesn't mean that I agree with it, but I just say, okay, that's where they're at. And then number 3 is that I have to kind of like sort through, is this something that I can approve of? And you see, that's the problem that I have with this, is that if I don't approve of this, then that does not make me hateful or negative. It just means that I am free to have a different opinion. I'm free to follow my conscience on these things. And I should also be free. I have the freedom of speech to engage with others who think differently. At least that seems to me to be reasonable. Here's an interesting question that came to my mind when I was going through this, is that why, according to the New Testament, was John the Baptist imprisoned? And if you're familiar with the story at all, is that John the Baptist, he called out Herod Antipas for his unlawful marriage to Herodias. According to Jewish law, that Herod was not permitted to marry her. He did it in violation to the Jewish religious law. Not, Herod was the guy who kind of enacted whatever civil laws that he wanted, but it was a violation of the religious law when he married this woman. And John the Baptist wasn't afraid to speak truth to power. And we hear that a lot. But in our culture more and more is that if you're a Christian, that's one of the things you should never do, is speak the truth to power. But when you stop and think about it, is that what John the Baptist did was really tame by our standards. He called out Herod for an unlawful opposite sex marriage to his brother Philip's wife. But by our standards today, that's pretty tame. Here's an interesting point, is that Jesus didn't rebuke John for being unloving. As a matter of fact, he said that John is really the greatest among those who have been born of women. He says he's an example to follow. And as a matter of fact, Jesus himself followed John's suit on various occasions. He said in Luke 13:5 to the people who were listening to him, but I tell you, no, unless you repent, you too will all perish. And so Jesus didn't step back and think that, really the loving thing to do is not to confront people about these things. So at the end of the day, really, what can we do about it? And I think that there's a number of options. One, of course, is that you can decide that you're going to be urbane and that you're much more sophisticated than these cultural dolts who are Christians, who don't understand art or or whatever else, or they don't have sophisticated understandings of mythology or philosophy or religion or whatever. Or you can just sit in your room and be pained by this and say, this is what's happening in our world today, and there's really not much I can do about it. Or is that you can boycott it. Here's one of the things that I know for a fact, is that not a single competitor will lose their medals if you decide not to watch the Olympics. Nobody's going to take that away from them. Is it sad? Yeah, they're the big losers in it. But I think that there should be some pinch points for somebody in this, where there is where people begin to understand that not everybody in culture has embraced your point of view or your morality, and that and it's not appropriate for us to be silenced, nor is it unloving when we speak out. Secondly, is that I know this for a fact, the media and advertisers will understand what they value most, and that boils down to one thing: revenues. When they are hit in the pocketbook, they're going to begin to rethink the wisdom that they embraced when they decided to make this decision that's not going to sit well with a vast majority, or a vast a group, I guess, of people in the world today. So, as a Christian, I need to understand one thing, and it saddens me at one level, is that our world is changing. Yes, has our world and its values always been contrary to the will of God? Yes, no question about it. But certainly it's in many respects nowadays becoming more and more public, and more blatant, and less tolerant, which is always, I find, to be ironic, is that those who preach the virtue of tolerance are often those who practice it the least. And so one of the things we can do is that we can pray. We can pray for our world leaders. We can pray for our culture. We can pray for revival. We can pray that we'll be able to communicate clearly the truths of the gospel to a world who is dying, who is lost and dying, without knowing the love of Jesus and repenting from their sins. We can be a light in our own personal lives, and that also with respect on how we treat others, and particularly others who see life differently than us. We can speak the truth, but we do it always as what the Bible says, is that we speak the truth in love. And we need to show love, not just in words and in speech, but in deeds and in truth. And I would challenge those who say, well, let's just be loving. I would challenge you to think through what does that mean practically in your life? I know what the Bible teaches us in Ephesians 5:11. It says, have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. I have to be careful in my own life, because I find myself from time to time truly becoming depressed and discouraged, and thinking that the small efforts that I'm doing in my life don't seem to be making much of a difference at all. But one of the things, and I hope that we'll be able to retain this privilege in our American culture now, is to have the freedom of speech and the freedom of worship, and we'll be able to bring what we believe into the public square, where we can have a free exercise of our religion, and to engage with folks who see things differently. As I wanted to share some thoughts with you today about this, and I hope that you've been blessed by it. I'd love to interact with you if you want to talk about it in a friendly and open-minded way. So that's it for now. I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.